You're listening to the Yeshiva of Newark at IDT podcast. I'm your host and curator, Rabbi Abram Kibalevich, and I hope you enjoy this episode. Clear the aisles, the projectionist, that's Micha. Hi, I'm here with Yitzhak Kolakowski, and we're talking furry things tonight. Furry animal things, maybe not alive, but we want to talk a little bit about what occurred, Yitzhak, post-World War II. There seemed to have been this great fascination with films that were centered on an animal as its star, with somehow some reason why the animal had either some special powers or some special aspects about that, and the interaction between humans and animals. There were so many films. We talked about the Francis the Talking Mule films that with Donald O'Connor. And these films, I think, are very different than the way dogs and horses were used in films of the 1930s and 40s. National Velvet that we've mentioned, and the Thin Man films that had Asta. The dogs obviously was in a certain sense trained well, a comic relief, but never really, again, Lassie, yes. But there was, in Lassie, I do believe, Roddy McDowall and Liz Taylor and others, they were able to make use of the expressions the dogs have, the training, of course, that all those collies had. But the idea of just let's throw everything at them. Let's throw as much shtick as we can. Let's put animals in there. You've mentioned 1951's these type of films with an animal protagonist, a boy who turns into a dog, a cat that has 7 lives, animals that journey cross country. This seems to have been what Disney, with their ability to, again, fool you into actually believing that these animals are acting according to script. And the actors that were associated with these animals were really not that important. Dean Jones, of course, in That Darn Cat, was quite a minor figure. He ended up, of course, being in a whole number of Disney films, but he wasn't a very well-known commodity. I think what Disney was able to do was finally figure out how to get these dogs and cats and other animals to be trained in a way, and the type of shtick that was used in terms of the camera work, to actually see them as the heroes of the adventure, whether they were intelligent animals, talking animals, psychic animals. They had it pretty much wrapped up well. Now, were those films really great? But they were great for kids. And when I was growing up, we couldn't wait for Disney's next live action film. Disney, of course, as you know, Yitzhak, was built on cartoons, was built on animation. But Walt and his brothers, and his brother Roy, they understood that they needed to expand. They needed to become a major studio, and they needed to get into live action. And eventually, of course, they were pioneers in the live action television adventure series like Zorro and others. So Disney, when they were in live action, oftentimes had animals at the center of their stories, and I think they also didn't need to have the greatest star talent around them. It's true, Disney did make some films, and I believe 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea was a Disney film, I'm pretty sure. And
yes, it was, yeah.
Right, and that really had major star power. 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea had a Kirk Douglas, right? I think Kirk Douglas was in it along with James Mason. Yes. So yeah, but really, their fuzzy films really didn't need it. And then they almost really, I think everybody abdicated that type of family film to Disney. It was interesting when you asked me about Benji the other day, that the Benji series was actually rejected by all the studios, and this Joe Camp ended up in 1974 with the dog, as I did a little bit of research, one of my favorite dogs from Petticoat Junction. And you might remember that dog that stole every scene he was in. I think his name was Higgins. And Higgins, at the age of 15, starred in Benji. And Higgins' children, his progeny, were the ones who continued. I think there's 5 or 6 films of Benji, and then they rebooted it. And Benji, of course, was a worldwide phenomenon. It was a film that I didn't. It was past my prime. Mark, did you when you were a kid? Did your parents take you to see any of the Benji films?
Yep. We saw the Benji movies and the sequels that ensued.
and I till last night I thought Disney was behind it, but really not. They were really a fellow by the name of Joe Camp really produced them all, and I think even the reboots they owe him all the residuals and all the monies for that, because he created this Benji franchise. And I guess, was it Benji's expressions? Did you think the human actors made a difference to you? It was all about the dog when you used to go.
It was mostly about the dogs.
Yeah. And so it's interesting that there was a number of films, and this is what we're going to start talking about, that was made post World War II, right in the very beginning, 1950, 51, where they tried other studios who didn't have what eventually became the expertise of working with animals, training them, making you believe, that they were actually doing what the script was calling for. And these films are fun to watch, but are really pretty much strikeouts. The two that I'm talking about in particular have very almost, you think that somebody had their ear to the writer's room in the other studio. One film is called Rhubarb, and the other film is called You Never Can Tell, or You Never Can Tell. Both films have the same premise, that start with a same premise, that an eccentric millionaire has left their complete estate to a pet. In You Never Can Tell, it's a German Shepherd, and in Rhubarb, it's a cat. Now, what are the chances? They're made in the same year, 1951, but then the films differ tremendously. I'll start with Rex. Is the recipient of these millions of dollars. By the way, there's still lawsuits abounding today about the personhood, as you know, of animals and whether they can be the recipients and therefore the owners of things. Can they really be, the money be bequeathed to them? But anyway, the point though is that both of these animals are these rich animals. In You Never Can Tell, Rex, the German Shepherd, is under the guardianship of an attractive girl. Peggy Dow, I think, is the name of the girl, the actress that plays her. She didn't play in too many films. And the plethora of letters that come in to try to insinuate themselves in her life, she rejects them. But there's one letter and one fellow who somehow is able to get through the door because he actually is telling the truth. He was Rex's sort of trainer, or his soldier that he was attached to in the recently past World War II. And he has pictures to prove it. Now, a romance starts to ensue and Rex's guardian, and the fellow seems to be on the up and up, but something is afoul, because he takes a trip suddenly. The next thing you know, the dog is poisoned. And what happened? His guardian is suspected immediately of killing the dog, and this way all the millions will revert to her. At this point, the film does something which was the best they could do. They give us a view of animal heaven. And in animal heaven, a great lion is sort of like the godlike figure who gets approached by Rex's neshama. And again, the cinematography that's used to sort of indicate that is basically negatives. What they do is they basically film the animals in negative, so you realize it is a dog that's being that somehow moves forward, and the dog can now speak. And the dog speaks and says that he wants to go back and catch his murderer because he knows who the murderer is. The murderer, of course, is this George fellow who has insinuated himself and plans, of course, to marry the guardian and this way get all the money. Maybe kill her too. So he's granted the wish till the full moon. Or the next day or two, he's given the ability to reincarnate himself into a human being. And the dog, but he needs help. So a southern racehorse that had died 60 years ago also goes with him. And that racehorse is reincarnated into his attractive assistant, complete with a faux southern accent. And they, in their reincarnation, immediately become set up as detectives. Rex Shepard, detective, played by Dick Powell. Now, Dick Powell was a singer in the 1930s who later changed. He was in a number of the films that were, I think he was in the first Marlowe film, playing this hard-boiled guy. So this sort of like played on his new hard-boiled reputation, but of course he's still a dog. In other words, he's a dog with a human's body, and he has a couple of days to prove that George has committed the murder. Of course, a lot of hijinks ensues because he still likes raw meat. He still finds himself attracted to balls that he wants to just run after. Turns out, of course, that the secret of the film is that if they don't go back within a day or two, they are stuck in their human forms. And as the film progresses, the film indicates that there's many of these animals among us, that there's many of these human beings that are strange and idiosyncratic, that are really actually animals that have become reincarnated for some sort of purpose and have decided to stay in their human guise. Now, the film, it's a mishmash. And you can see that despite the talent that went into it, I think it was the only major feature that was directed by Lou Breslau, who is Yitzchok, as I said to Yitzchok off pod, was the director of a number of Stooge shorts, and it was a writer. And this is really an example of Hollywood trying. The problem is, of course, is that there's too little dog. In other words, it's supposed to be a dog film. It's supposed to be an animal film. Of course, he meets up with his boxer friend that was with him in the army. But he ends up freeing a bunch of dogs from a pound. But again, the mixture of human and animal just doesn't work. The film Rhubarb, which is a little bit more well known, is another film directed by Arthur Lubin, another Jewish fellow, just like Lou Breslau. And in this film, it starred a major Hollywood actor that had actually nabbed the Academy Award for The Lost Weekend, Ray Milland. and Ray Milland, and we've talked to Yitzchak, how at the end of his career was taking everything. But here in 1951, he played guardian to this alley cat called Rhubarb. Now, the film starts with Rhubarb. It's a Paramount film, and obviously MGM is the big competition, and they want to say they actually have Rhubarb do the MGM Lion's Roar to show you that there's a new animal in town, not Leo from MGM, but actually Rhubarb. And although the name Rhubarb is probably said hundreds of times in the film, and Rhubarb, of course, was old slang for like a knockdown, drag out fight between people, like a rhubarb has occurred. It isn't the vegetation. So the conceit is the cat ends up being the recipient of a millionaire's money. But instead of the cat dying, the cat is they try to kill the cat because the millionaire cuts out his greedy daughter from the will. And the cat is not only the owner of all the money, he's also the owner of a baseball team. So here again, Hollywood was trying to do another baseball movie. Baseball then was the American pastime. It was the same year as Angels in the Outfield and many other sort of baseball themed movies to come. Let's throw animals in. Let's throw a baseball team in, and these lovable losers, just like in Angels in the Outfield, they become winners somehow. Although it's not explained how, by Ray Milland's chop that they need to feel rhubarb is lucky. By rhubarb, when they send some refund checks to people who happen to have petted rhubarb, that spreads a rumor in the locker room. Which, by the way, if you look very closely, you'll see Leonard Nimoy is in there as one of the baseball players. He doesn't say a word, but you can see Leonard Nimoy standing there. I guess he has his eyebrow arched and thinking how illogical the whole thing is. But basically what happens is that if you pet rhubarb, somehow that gives you luck. And then this last place Brooklyn Dodgers, they're called the Brooklyn Loons. They can somehow they become from the last place team to the best place, they win the pennant, and they're ready to play, of course, the Yankees in the World Series. And the Yankees somehow didn't have to be turned into anybody else. The Yanks were always the Yanks. And again, it becomes a Subway Series with Brooklyn versus Manhattan. A lot of cute things go on. But the problem, Mark and Yitzchak, is the cat. A cat, unlike a dog, Lassie could just stand there looking at you and you fall in love. Benji didn't really have to. Benji learned a lot of tricks, but a lot of it is the eyes, the expression that dogs have. Cats, as you know, are, I guess, what's the right word for it? They are inscrutable. They do their own thing. And to get them, they needed 14 cats to be able to do even the little bit of tricks that rhubarb was supposed to do. One thing rhubarb was supposed to be able to do was every dog was afraid of him. And you just couldn't believe it watching it today, because basically what they do is they just rewind the camera. The dogs run. Oh, here's the dogs running backwards or something like that, or the dogs running away. And you really, unfortunately, cannot really buy into it as much as the flights of fancy of the story, the intricate plots. But all of those were probably just as good as anything that was in the 60s or 70s, maybe even better. The problem was the quality of the technical quality, whether it was CGI or animatronics, or it just couldn't make it happen. So I really think these films, when you see them, are interesting curiosities of attempts of something that later became standard kid fare. Mark, when I was growing up in the 60s, you in the 70s, these were the films that our parents wanted us to go see, were these films that were family oriented, that had animals at their center. And it's interesting that sort of Hollywood knew what they were trying to do, but just couldn't get it done. Another interesting little note about rhubarb is, and this I know was a dig intentionally, during the World Series, Ray Milland's fiance is watching it on television, and she can't be at the game or near rhubarb because she's allergic, and that plays a role in the film, that her allergies to rhubarb means that she's going to be able to discover where rhubarb is. Jan Sterling, who happens to be Paul Douglas's wife at the time, plays that character, and her allergies become a key aspect of the film. She's watching on TV, and the television screen is constantly going up and down, like early television sets did. In fact, even during the crucial parts of the game where rhubarb returns at the very last inning, and they're able to somehow score runs, they tell you that on television, I'm sorry, we weren't able to show you that because we had to be in commercial. Again, Hollywood trying to tell you, don't stay home and watch TV. Your screens are not going, it's going to be black and white. Well, the movie's black and white too, but the screens are not going to be stable, and commercials are going to interrupt all the best stuff, and you're going to miss things, which again was Hollywood's way of taking its digs at television, which it did continuously throughout the 50s, trying to get people to leave their homes and come there. So I think both of these films are cute. That Disney and Joe Camp and others have basically spoiled these films for our kids. None of these kids will buy into it. And it's a shame, because some of these stories are cute and do have some sort of positive message. So again, it's sort of like a blip, but a blip worth exploring. Yitzchak, before we get to Mark's film, I know you wanted to add a third film to this League of Infamy. And what was that, Yitzchak?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sitting here with my pet, which is a lizard, and I can commiserate with allergies. That's why I pick a non-allergenic pet.
Yes.
And, actually, these two films, which I was not really that aware of, it made me think of, from the same time, a movie called The Great Rupert from 1950, starring Jimmy Durante and also Terry Moore, who I once met at Monster Bash a couple of years ago, and she's a very nice person. And it's produced by George Pal, who made a lot of the puppet tunes before that, and after that, a lot of science fiction movies, like
including the Time Machine.
Yeah, The Time Machine, The War of the Worlds, both of those based on H.G. Wells, and the Destination Moon and others. So it's a strange little movie. Also, like you said, those movies don't really hold up. This one, George Pal did use the stop motion effects that he used in his previous short subjects, the puppet tunes. Some of them he actually worked with Ray Harryhausen to make, but then he kind of, I think Harryhausen was maybe a little too good for him. That's where Harryhausen got his start. And actually, mentioning Harryhausen, of course, mentioned Terry Moore was in Harryhausen's first feature that he did together with Willis O'Brien, which was Mighty Joe Young, which of course had the stop motion in there. It was just the year before that, 1949, with a totally stop motion gorilla. But it was meant to be just a normal gorilla, maybe a little bit bigger than normal, but not like King Kong, much more a different type of a character. And here, so I guess Terry Moore, she had a lot of work with stop motion animals. Here, it was a squirrel who kind of saved the day with a poor family.
It's really a Christmas movie, though. Really, I mean, the movie really milks Christmas quite a bit, right?
Yeah. There was actually recently Sven Tooney, which is on after Svengoolie. They used that as their Christmas special. That was
the Great Rupert.
It's a great Rupert. Yeah, that's kind of we're reminded of. I'm not so impressed by this movie, even though it has a lot of things that I would enjoy. I like movies in black and white from the 50s. I like Terry Moore. I like George Pal.
Jimmy Durante, though, is an acquired taste. I think you have to admit.
Durante, I have a hard time really enjoying. I think of the pretty bad movies he made together with Buster Keaton for MGM, and when the talkie era started, that were
right.
just
right. But those were really more horrible, not because of Durante. It was because of the incomprehensible pairing of these two.
Yeah.
It was sort of like, we can't. Buster is so talented; he can do so much. We can't just let him be on the wayside. Let's connect him with this, this motor mouth, fellow, this Jimmy Durante. But it didn't make any sense, and therefore the films were grotesque. But Durante had chiseled out a unique about Bob Hope a couple of weeks ago. You could make a case that Durante was sort of like Bob Hope, like in terms of his. He kept himself, in the public high spotlight. He did a lot of television work with the Lennon sisters and other things. So, and because of how unique he was, and because all the people watching TV's parents and grandparents loved the guy, he was able to really have a career, quite late into his almost, I guess, into his 80s. I think he was still showing up on
Mad World.
Right. Yeah. There he has sort of like a cameo, but yeah, he's sort of the
he was the one who
he's the spark who starts. He's the spark that starts everything.
W.
That's right. He has a great death scene there. right in the beginning of the film. Look, Durante is definitely an acquired taste, and Durante
I don't
does
dislike him, but I just can't. I can't get into him that
the
much.
question though. But Yitzchak, just based on, I mean, did you think Durante's interactions with this animated puppet squirrel, whatever it was, did you buy into it? Did you believe there's a relationship between human and animal? Again, a
Not
dog.
really, no.
Look, like we said, dogs unfortunately have it all over any other animal because of their unique relationship to human beings, which could be captured even in a silent film. I think all these attempts to throw other, except horses were a little bit different, mules, but I think
and apes,
yes,
these.
Right. I have to say, although our cutoff is 40 years, I do want to say another film that wasn't Disney, wasn't Joe Camp, which I think, Mark, maybe you'll chime in on this, I think might be really the best of these human animal stories is Babe. I really, again, I know it's a lot of sentimental stuff, but I don't know. I
agree.
I enjoyed it. Mark,
you have never seen Babe.
Oh, your kids saw it, I'm sure.
No, my kids are too young for Babe.
Okay. Now, first of all, Babe, again, it's really past our cutoff, but George Miller, who did all the Mel Gibson Mad Max films and a bunch of other stuff.
I like George.
A film that is very hard to watch, excruciating hard to watch, but is in some uplifting is Lorenzo's Oil.
No, I didn't realize that George Miller.
Yeah, George Miller was the director of Lorenzo's Oil as well, and like I would say again, I think in Babe, it all comes together. I think the main thing, I think you have to understand in these animal films, and they understood this in the original Lassie films as well. Today we look back at Elizabeth Taylor and Roddy McDowall as major stars, but they were just starting then. You don't need to get a super actor in the role. It's meant to be a showcase of the animal.
Happy Feet is what I'm referring to.
Yes, which is with penguins, right?
Penguins.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So I think that you to get that balance right. In other words, even a star like Durante really can't share the spotlight. Ray Milland. I mean, you're talking about Oscar-winning hams or Oscar-winning stars. You're talking about hams who chew up the scenery. These films need like a June Lockhart, and Lassie. They need someone who you can relate to, who puts feeling into their line readings, but lets the animals really do their stuff. Babe is a little bit different because the animals talk, but I think James Cromwell, who plays Babe's handler, the one who has lost his sheepdog, and Babe saves him. Yitzchak, back me up on this. What does he say? You did. Just being able to say, "That'll do, pig." I know it just brings tears to my eyes. That'll do, pig. And of course, it uses Camille Saint-Saëns' organ symphony as its major theme throughout. So, Mark, any film that has the organ symphony running through it, and it's used with such great effect. I mean, it's like the weirdest organ music in the middle of this great symphony, but it works perfect in Babe. And again, I didn't the remakes, Babe in the City, etc., Babe's Christmas. That was a film that there's enough of the real thing. The animatronics are there. It's sort of like we talked last week, Mark, when we talked about Christopher Reeve and Superman. It takes a long time for these good ideas to finally matriculate and catch, and the technology and the know-how to catch up with them, that they can actually now be presented in a way that, oh, that's a good movie. Oh, that could be a movie L'Doiros. I think that's
it's
a great
good segue.
Great segue for your film. Go ahead.
Yes, no, it's an excellent segue to 2001: A Space Odyssey, of course, because in 1968, special effects for outer space. This is pre George Lucas and Star Wars, right? A good
Almost 10 years.
9 years, 10 years, almost 10 years, right? 68 is when A Space Odyssey comes out, and Star Wars, of course, is 77. But it's mesmerizing to watch, just visually. It remains, I think, one of the most striking films. I think it's deadly dull from a point of view of dialogue and story, but you're so captured, you're so ensnared by the visuals and by the, I wouldn't say minimalist special effects, because they're quite elaborate for their day. But it's the other elements of the story that I think are more questionable as an artifact of greatness. I think the way the film looks, certainly from the space portion of the film, not the prologue necessarily, although, if you don't mind people dressed up as gorillas and,
Yitzchak said before,
down.
when I told Yitzchak you were going to be highlighting this film, he said that was the only part he liked of the film.
Yeah. Some people actually do only like the prologue and don't like much when things get into space. The prologue is thought-provoking from, an intellectual or cultural point of view. And what is this monolith? Does this suggest, as it surely does, some extraterrestrial life? Is it man at a more advanced stage of evolution himself?
It seems to appear like when it appears in that prologue, it appears at the moment that, according to Arthur C. Clarke and Kubrick, the ape-like creatures are about to make the turn to
use tools.
Use tools and be more human-like.
Tools. Yes.
And of course,
and the obelisk, the monolith, is maybe a kind of catalyst for this. And it's also the fact that it was buried in the moon, in that crater near Tycho, that also is a register inflection point to this new stage of space travel and the ability to go to Jupiter and of course eventually go through the space gate and meet these higher life forms.
Yes, right. So it's almost it's a big question I think people have, Mark. Is the monolith there to say, oh, I've got to register because man is now ready to make that next jump, or is the monolith somehow the godlike engine that pushes humanity towards its next role? And I think I guess Kubrick leaves it so elliptic and so
it's a very elliptical movie. That's the theme of this movie.
But I think he wanted it. I think he wanted it to the dialogue to be boring, because I think to me, and you're probably getting to this, but to me, and I remember I saw this film on its re-release. When the film came out in 68, I did not see the film, but I read the Mad Magazine parody of it a couple of months later. And it was called, in the parody, A Space Idiocy instead of A Space Odyssey. And I said, I can't see this, especially since its running time was unlike your typical 2-hour film. I think its running time is 2 hours and 50 minutes. Is that so? Or
2 hours and 53 minutes, I believe.
Yes, okay. I want everyone to say I said this without any computer looking at. Yes, it's about
I didn't look at it. I looked at it the other day.
Yes, okay, but 2 hours and 50 minutes. So now in 72, the film was re-released. I went to see it as a 12-year-old.
Right.
And of course, my dad, Oliver Sholem, had to come pick me up 3.5 hours later after he dropped me off. And I have to tell you that the last 20 minutes were some of the strangest of my 12-year-old mind's experiences.
I mean, it's almost psychedelic.
And I have to tell you, it's still striking to me. Of course, the it's almost 7 minutes, I think, of sort of like shaking and moving of the camera, and then afterwards, he's sort of an old man in some sort of in some sort of futuristic spot. And of course,
I mean, it was likely Keir Dullea, who plays David Bowman. I think was made to look like this elderly, almost, alien creature.
Yes,
it's like different stages of his life, and he's gonna return to Earth perhaps with this higher form of consciousness being accessed now and achieving, another layer or another stage of evolutionary advancement. But it's not clear. I mean, this is what I'm saying is just sort of speculation, and born of some of the things I've read.
But I was a pretty precocious, well-read 12-year-old. Who was this film for? I mean, it clearly was not for kids.
No.
This was not for right now. Kubrick had.
I mean, a kid can look at it, and a kid could be in awe of the movements of these spaceships and the kind of life outside of the Earth, and be struck by the visuals and the music. The Richard Strauss.
Thus Spake Zarathustra. Yes.
So it's a younger person can appreciate some elements of it, but will be left confused at best, by the actual film and the plot even.
Yeah, and I one thing I discovered on my rewatching the film that I think Kubrick, of course, wanted, even Keir-Dullea, who had done really great work in the early 60s in Mark and Lisa and some other films some independent films that he made. He wanted the dialogue to be stilted because I think he was making a point that our advancements in scientifically had not really been aligned with the advancements in our heart and spirit. That it was like we were taking so much of the technological marvels that the age had ushered in with a nonchalance and a boredom. There was the human spirit, the excitement of adventure. It wasn't there.
Yeah, I mean, you could see that very clearly in the opening scenes in space, where they're taking that Pan Am, flight to the spaceship to the space station, and then that's gonna get them to the moon, where it's so boring. It's boring. It's limited. There are hardly any people actually traveling. If you notice, it's like the one passenger on this shuttle, but it's all very nonchalant, very boring, bored.
Which I think is itself a comment. There's something wrong with humanity. And I think that's, to me, part of the reason why the monolith appears. It doesn't just appear because, Mark, you've made it to the moon. Now I've got to show up, because it's also there because it needs to, that spark that needs to be inserted into human beings, the spark of greatness,
creativity, of greatness, of courage, something.
Right, which is missing.
It's almost like the gorillas in the prologue have more that sense of discovery when that hominid finally knows what to do with his bone and begins to use the bone in battle. Right. There's a sense of freshness, and of course it's very animalistic, it's very primitive, but there's that vitality that these beasts are showing, these beasts that are going to become human, that are displaying they're more in touch with their nature, or with their with their identities as pulsating vital animals.
And I would say just the cherry on top on that icing is probably, again, one of Kubrick's best cinematography tricks, which is the bone that gets thrown up in slow motion becomes the spaceship. That is such a wonderful chop that it's almost never been equaled, really. That type. No,
it's a very striking moment. It's that 2-shot scene with the bone flying up and becoming kind of like ebbing into or morphing into the space shuttle, because
it's really, again, that's really the power.
It's an extension. It's an extension of that same impulse,
right? So that is almost the most perfect thing about the film. I think the other thing which has to be commented on before you get even deeper is the fact that Hal is really more of a character than
the human. And he's programmed to get one passenger to Jupiter, and I think the the question, there must be some limitation on the science or on the life support system that would allow, multiple passengers to arrive at the.
Oh, so I said, so Hal is the one with this choice. He has
to make sure the mission is done. Yes.
See, I didn't get that.
I don't think Hal is autonomously acting to kill, Bowman and Poole, I think, and the other three that are in the hibernetics, in the sleep. I think it's that he needs to fulfill the mission, and the mission, for some reason, only allows, either nobody to survive or the one person to survive. It's not. There's no evidence that he is autonomously taking that decision. At least none that I could see.
So it's not some sort of AI getting conscious. Because I always thought Hal's death, where he starts devolving and he starts
very poignant in its
yes, because it's almost
much more poignant than the death of Poole or the death of the other, the ones that are in hibernetic sleep.
Right, because Poole dies.
Those characters are totally uninteresting.
Yeah, and Kubrick does something great by killing them in the total vacuum of space.
Yeah,
where there is no sound. Right,
there's no sound. There's nothing.
No music. No
really.
sound.
There's no event. There's no quality to kind of enrich that or deepen or complexify that occurrence. It's just matter of fact.
And when Hal dies, of course, he devolves almost like Cliff Robertson in Flowers for Algernon, where he loses his higher level of intelligences. And when the first time I ever heard Champaign, Illinois, was Hal. Hal was built there, and of course. Thanks for joining us for another episode from the Yeshiva of Newark at IDT Podcast. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast app so you don't miss a single episode.